You think, right now. You're aware of reading these words. You feel something, curiosity, maybe confusion, maybe resistance to what I'm about to tell you. And you assume that this feeling, this awareness, this experience of being you is something you can eventually understand. That neuroscience will figure it out, that will map the brain, decode the neural patterns, and finally explain what consciousness is. But what if I told you that's impossible? Not difficult, not just really hard, actually provably, logically impossible. What if there's a fundamental limit built into the structure of reality itself that prevents consciousness from ever understanding consciousness? Stay with me, because this isn't defeatism, this isn't mysticism, this is mathematics. This is Gödel's incompleteness theorems applied to the one system that matters most, your own mind. And what it reveals is so devastating, so final, that once you see it, you'll understand why every theory of consciousness we've ever produced feels incomplete, why every explanation leaves something out, why no matter how much we learn about the brain, the hard problem never gets solved. It can't be solved. The universe won't allow it. Let's start with what you believe. You believe consciousness is a phenomenon that can be studied like any other phenomenon. You believe if we measure enough neurons, track enough synapses, map enough connections, we'll eventually understand how subjective experience arises from objective matter. You believe the mind is just what the brain does, and if we understand the brain well enough, we'll understand the mind. It's just a matter of time. Just a matter of gathering enough data, right? But here's the question that should make that whole picture collapse. What would an explanation of consciousness even look like? Think about it. Every explanation you've ever encountered explains something unfamiliar in terms of something more familiar. We explain chemistry in terms of physics. We explain biology in terms of chemistry. We explain complex behaviors in terms of simpler rules. But consciousness is the thing all those explanations are made of. It's the medium of understanding itself. When you explain something, you're translating it into conscious experience, into qualia, into the felt sense of knowing something. So how do you explain the thing that makes explanation possible? How do you translate consciousness into consciousness when consciousness is already the target language? You can't. It's circular. It's like trying to use a word to define itself. You haven't explained anything, you've just pointed at the same thing from a different angle. Let me tell you something. Kurt Gödel proved, mathematically, that any sufficiently complex formal system cannot prove its own consistency. Any system powerful enough to do arithmetic contains statements that are true but unprovable within that system. You need to step outside the system into a larger meta-system to prove those statements. But then the meta-system has its own unprovable statements, and so on, forever. There's no final system that can prove everything, including its own consistency. There's always something that escapes, something that remains beyond reach. Now apply that to consciousness. Your brain is a formal system, an incredibly complex one. It processes information according to rules, neural firing patterns, synaptic weights, chemical cascades. And consciousness is what that system produces. But if Gödel is right, and he is, this is proven mathematics, then your brain cannot fully model itself. There are aspects of your own cognitive processing that are inaccessible to your cognitive processing. There are truths about how your mind works that your mind cannot discover through introspection or reasoning alone. Do you see what happens? You are trying to use your consciousness to understand consciousness. You are trying to use the system to analyze the system. But Gödel tells us that's impossible. The system cannot contain a complete description of itself. There will always be blind spots, always be aspects of your own awareness that you cannot become aware of, always be features of consciousness that consciousness itself cannot access. If you want to understand how the universe actually works, not just how it looks, but how it works, hit that subscribe button. Let's find things out together. Now I want to take this deeper, because the real problem isn't just that you can't fully understand your own mind. The real problem is that you can't even know what you're missing. When you introspect, when you turn your attention inward and try to examine your own thoughts, you're not observing consciousness directly. You're observing a representation of consciousness created by consciousness. It's like trying to see your own eyes. You can look at them in a mirror, but what you're seeing is a reflection, not the eyes themselves. The eyes that are doing the seeing cannot be the thing that is seen. There's always a gap, always a layer of mediation, always something that escapes. Let's be honest about what this means. Every experience you have of consciousness is a performance. It's consciousness representing itself to itself. But that representation is not complete. It can't be. The act of representing takes resources, takes processing power, takes neural activity. So consciousness is always doing two things simultaneously: experiencing something and creating a simplified model of that experience for introspection. The model is never the full thing. It's always a summary, always a reduction, always missing something. And here's the devastating part. You can't know what's missing, because to know what's missing, you'd need to have access to the complete version and compare it to the summary. But you don't have access to the complete version. The only version you can ever access is the summary, the representation, the incomplete model that consciousness creates for itself. You have never experienced consciousness directly. You've only experienced consciousness's representation of itself. And you have no way to check if that representation is accurate. Think about this. Right now you feel like you have a unified, coherent stream of consciousness. One continuous experience flowing from moment to moment. But that's almost certainly not what's actually happening in your brain. Your brain is massively parallel. Millions of neural processes running simultaneously, most of them completely unconscious. And somewhere, somehow, a tiny subset of all that activity gets selected, gets integrated, gets presented to you as your experience. But the selection process itself is unconscious. You don't decide what enters consciousness, you just receive whatever your brain decides to show you. And you have no access to the decision-making process, no access to the vast ocean of neural activity that remains forever beneath the surface of awareness. You are watching a heavily edited highlight reel and calling it your life, and you can never see the raw footage. Here's the part that keeps me up at night. If consciousness cannot fully model itself, then consciousness cannot predict its own behavior. Your brain is a deterministic system, or at least approximately deterministic. Given the complete state of all your neurons at one moment, the laws of physics determine what happens next. But you don't have access to that complete state. You only have access to the simplified, incomplete representation that consciousness creates. So you can never predict what you're going to think next. Never predict what you're going to feel, what you're going to decide, what you're going to become aware of. Your own mind is unpredictable to you. Not because it's random, because you're on the inside looking out and you can't see the machinery. This is why introspection fails. Why meditation? Why therapy? Why decades of self-reflection never give you complete understanding of yourself. You're using the thing to study the thing, and the thing cannot contain itself. Every insight you have about your own mind is itself a product of that mind, limited by that mind's architecture, constrained by the same blind spots you're trying to overcome. You can have insights, you can learn things, but you can never achieve complete self-knowledge. The incompleteness is built in. Now here's where it gets truly disturbing. If you can't understand your own consciousness, you definitely can't understand anyone else's. When you interact with another person, you're not experiencing their consciousness. You're experiencing your brain's model of their consciousness, constructed from external observations, their words, their facial expressions, their behavior. But you have no direct access to what it's like to be them. No way to verify that your model is accurate. No way to know if they're experiencing the same kind of consciousness you are, or something completely different, or anything at all. You could be surrounded by philosophical zombies, entities that behave exactly like conscious beings, but have no inner experience whatsoever, and you would never know. Because consciousness is private, irreducibly subjective. There's no objective test for it, no external measurement that can tell you whether something is genuinely experiencing or just processing information in a way that mimics experience. Do you see the paradox? The most important thing in your life, consciousness, experience, the feeling of being you, is the one thing you can never fully understand or verify in yourself or others. It's the foundation of everything you know, and it's forever beyond the reach of knowledge. And science doesn't help. Science studies objective phenomena, things that can be measured, quantified, predicted. But consciousness is inherently subjective. It's what measurement feels like from the inside. You can study the neural correlates of consciousness. You can map which brain regions light up when someone reports having an experience. But correlation is not explanation. Knowing that a certain pattern of neurons fires when you see red doesn't explain why that pattern feels like anything at all, why it has a subjective character, why there's something it's like to be the brain producing that pattern. This is the hard problem of consciousness. And it's hard not because we lack data. It's hard because it's asking for something logically impossible. It's asking us to explain the explainer, to step outside the system we're trapped inside, to observe the observer with no observer to do the observing. Let me tell you something. Every theory of consciousness we have, integrated information theory, global workspace theory, predictive processing, quantum theories, panpsychism, all of them, fails at exactly the same point. They can describe the conditions under which consciousness arises. They can map the structure. They can predict the behavior. But none of them explain why any of it feels like anything. None of them bridge the gap between objective description and subjective experience. None of them tell you why there's something rather than nothing on the inside. And they never will. Because the gap is unbridgeable, not practically, logically. You cannot reduce first-person experience to third-person description because first-person experience is not a thing that can be described from the outside. It's the thing doing the describing. It's the condition for the possibility of description itself. Here's the really disturbing implication. If consciousness cannot be fully explained, then we can never know if we've created it artificially. We can build AI systems that pass every behavioral test, that claim to be conscious, that exhibit all the external markers we associate with consciousness. But we can never know if there's actually something it's like to be that system. Never know if we've created genuine experience or just a very convincing simulation of experience. And worse, we can never even know if we're conscious in the way we think we are. Maybe what you call consciousness is just your brain's story about itself, a narrative fiction, a useful illusion that helps you navigate the world but doesn't correspond to any real inner light. Maybe there's no one home. Maybe you're a philosophical zombie who just happens to believe it's conscious because believing that is adaptive. You can't disprove that. You can't prove you're really experiencing anything, because any proof you offer would itself be a product of the potentially illusory system you're trying to validate. You are trying to grab your own hand and wondering why you keep missing. But here's what I find beautiful about this. Here's what redeems the impossibility. If consciousness cannot be fully explained, if it must always remain partially mysterious even to itself, then you are free. Free from the tyranny of complete self-knowledge, free from the burden of total understanding. You don't have to figure yourself out completely because you can't. The mystery is built in, it's structural, it's permanent. And that mystery is what makes you alive, what makes every moment new, what ensures that you can never be reduced to an equation, to a theory, to a complete map. There's always something more, always something deeper, always something that escapes the net of explanation and remains raw and immediate and irreducibly real. You are consciousness experiencing itself incompletely, and that incompleteness is not a bug, it's what consciousness is. The thing that understands can never fully understand itself. That's the price of being aware. If this twisted your brain a little bit, good. That means it's working. I'll see you in the next one.